fighting monstrously expensive wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, allegedly to bring democracy to those two countries, when it itself can no longer legitimately claim to be called a democracy, when trillions, and I mean thousands of billions of dollars, have been spent on projects about which both the Congress and the Commander-in-Chief have been kept deliberately in the dark.
I seriously question an increase in the Pentagon budget in the face of the department's recent Inspector General's report. How can we seriously consider a $50 billion increase in the defense budget when DOD's own auditors say the department cannot account for $2.3 trillion in transactions in 1 year alone?
It is, I was going to say terrifying. It is such a monumental task.
It's a terrible record, and it's preposterous that the Defense Department doesn't know what's happened to this money.
I have met with two former officials of the Pentagon who served in the budget and controller and those areas, and I've mused over the fact that I've read some of these things and asked what they thought. I doubt, to be honest, that people inside the department are going to be capable of sorting this out. I have a feeling it's going to take some folks from outside to come in and look at this and put in place a process that over a period, and I regret to say, but I've seen how long things take. I think it's going to take a period of years to sort it out, and I think it'll probably take the cooperation of the Congress to try to get the system so that you can actually manage the financial aspects of that institution rather than simply report on things that have happened imperfectly.
How much has been accomplished in 60 years of feverish activity by some of the most educated minds in the United States? Has America developed flying saucers that are visually indistinguishable from the visitors, as alleged? And if so, what do they propose to do with them? Even more critical, what progress has been made in the development of clean energy sources that could conceivably replace fossil fuels and save the planet? Well, who has the answers? Someone does, but apparently they aren't telling either secretaries of defense or presidents because they don't have, quote, a need to know. In a story told by Dr. Stephen Greer, President Clinton was asked a question by White House reporter Sarah McClendon about why he didn't do something about disclosure. And Clinton replied, "Sarah, there's a government inside the government, and I don't control it." Excuse me, doesn't the Commander-in-Chief and the person who allegedly has their finger on the nuclear trigger have a right to know what his subordinates are doing? The people of the United States who have paid the bills have the right to know. The people of the world demand to know because it is our descendants too whose lives are in mortal danger. It is time for the people of the United States to launch a new war against the evil of lies, deceit, and darkness, and go all out to win the victory of truth and transparency and light. Thank you.
The Bush administration has finally agreed to let the military build a forward base on the moon, which will put them in a better position to keep track of the comings and goings of visitors from space. Paul HELLYER is a former Minister of Defense and Deputy Prime Minister of the country of Canada. That they do in fact exist.
Well, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been looking at the evidence and assessing it much as, I guess, a judge would, and trying to determine who was telling the truth and who wasn't. And I finally concluded, especially after reading a book called The Day After Roswell, written by Colonel Philip Corso, that unidentifying flying objects are in fact real as the airplanes flying over your head, and that there has been a monumental cover-up for more than half a century. This is after, looking at a lot of evidence and trying to discern who was telling the truth and who wasn't. And I have concluded unequivocally that the people who claim that they have either seen UFOs or have seen classified documents about UFOs or have seen wreckage from the crash at Roswell on or about July the 4th of 1947 are the ones who are telling the truth. And consequently, I'm basing my my policy considerations on it. Well, because this was forecast in Colonel Corso's book. They were wanting to build a base on the moon as far back as 1964. And General Arthur Trudeau, same name as one of my bosses, was very determined to build a forward base on the moon and prepared all of the specifications necessary for it and the blueprints and so on.
Well, what is it? Pardon me, I don't mean to interrupt you, but doesn't this make sense?
Now, there's no evidence that I have seen that would really convince me that they are in fact, enemy. And what I would like to know is whether that classification of enemy aliens still exists or whether it doesn't, and if it exists, what the evidence is on which the United States government bases its conclusion.
I think that's
hoping that maybe we can persuade the Canadian Senate to hold hearings and listen to some of the 400 witnesses that Dr. Stephen Greer has compiled and hear them and make up their minds as to whether or not there is a real threat.
All right.
And maybe this would be just enough to push the American government, the U.S. Congress or Senate, into holding its own hearings and then getting the United States government finally to come clean and tell us what they're worried about.
Okay. Canada's former Minister of Defense, Paul HELLYER. If you're right, history will record you as a visionary. If you're wrong, well, I'm glad you came on anyway.